It's how we quickly talk about how we do this classification. So what we do is we do something called training. So we have a bunch of input data. And what we do is we take this input data and we determine what features are important for it to determine the right label for it. And we build a feature extractor that extracts that feature from that input. And so then taking all the input, we extract all the features, we create something called a feature set, which is information about all the input. And then we feed it into something called a machine learning algorithm. And then when we have data that doesn't have labels, we can use the same feature extractor to extract the right features from the input, feed it into our classifier model, and we get a label. It looks very, very complicated, I'm sure, if this is your first time seeing it, but hope.
Welcome to Discussions. I'm your host, Ian Trottier. This is Winwood Radio. And you just finished listening to Preethi Kasireddy speak to We Are Developers. That is a presentation on the blockchain. And that is a little sample of what we expect to most likely hear from her today. We'll definitely be going into some more basic elements of the blockchain and probably not so descriptive. But what is the blockchain? Now, let me segue let me just go back. And if you were tuning in at the 3:30 hour, I brought in international renowned scientist on global warming / climate change, Ken Caldeira. Ken's a fellow at Stanford, and he's also with the Carnegie Institute. So if you caught that episode, if you didn't catch the episode, please do. I've got it archived on my website, iantrottier.com. You can listen to that now via Mixcloud. So that's climate change and global warming. And if you're in Florida or Miami, this is going to be affecting you drastically. And you already see it in the local streets. They're already trying to they're elevating intersections. And we'll see what benefit that has. But I don't know the statistics, something like the next 15, 20 years. A pretty substantial parts of South Beach could be underwater. But we've got ice sheets melting and a climate change in effect. So Ken Caldeira, expert on that topic. So I didn't bring it up with him, but it's not really what I do. But to one element, a couple weeks ago, I think it's been 3 weeks now, hosted Dane Wigington. And look, Dane is Ken, and just like Jeremy Lance, that spoke about mangroves in Bangladesh. Ken's a scientist. He goes after the data that is given to him, that his students are digging up, that he's finding. He's a scientist, so he's basically just trying to help corporations and people understand the effects of what they're doing on the globe, the planet, rather. Dane's case is also very valid. Now, Ken doesn't have a case. Ken presents. But I urge you to look into Dane and his page, geoengineeringwatch.org. And I asked Ken a little bit about that and what that was. And it's essentially an attempt to reflect the sun rays back into the atmosphere to slow down, if I'm getting this right, to slow down the effects of the carbon dioxide and other emissions, pollutants entering the atmosphere that are melting ice sheets. It's a whole other topic, but what Dane is saying is, look, it might be working, but it's also having adverse effects on people's health, on the way I live my life, and certainly how I'm receiving sun to power my house. So then it becomes complex, right? Because at the end of the conversation, and I'll get to the blockchain in a minute because we're bringing Preethi on in about 10 minutes, but then it becomes a complex kind of issue in that, okay, so what do we do to curb climate change? Whether you listen to Jeremy Lance on the mangroves, or you listen to Dane on the geoengineering, or we're talking about Ken, every bit is a little bit different. But hey, we're all in this together, so we all, and not all of us do, but we all kind of have to come to the understanding that, how do we fix this thing? Okay, so Ken says, look, we've got to come together, as we did to put a man on the moon, we've got to come together to find cheap, reliable, renewable energy sources, alternatives, okay, that aren't burning and aren't emitting toxins into the environment. Simple. Dane's argument, and the reason I'm kind of bringing the two of those together is because these are, and they're different in their right, but they both have kind of things that we can learn from, right? So the only reason, so solar panels. It is an alternative to energy, coal burning. But also, does it coincide at all with geoengineering and the aluminum particles that are floating in the air that are hoping to reflect the sun rays back? Okay, so are those having adverse effects on health? All right. I continue to expand show. I can continue to broaden spectrum, and I appreciate you listening. And that's what we do. That's what we're doing, is trying to make the world a better place. It's simply put. Simply put. Contact your congressman. Contact your senator. Unfortunately, it is a political thing. And we've got to take action politically because we have the system that we can do that. Okay, great. So if you turned in and you caught Ken, great, thank you. And if you didn't, please access that discussion on my website, iantrottier.com. I've got it archived up there. I've also got, if you scroll down, a few guests below him, Dan Wigington. Listen to both, please. All right. Blockchain. Preethi Kasireddy. Who is Preethi Kasireddy? Smart cookie she is. And we are excited to have her on the show here in a few moments. She excelled in the financial sector at Goldman Sachs. That after a background at USC in industrial and systems engineering. Then from Goldman Sachs, she went to Menlo Park, California firm Andreesen Horowitz. And now we bring on to tell us about what it's like to be a blockchain software engineer. Check out her Software Engineering Daily discussion, if you will. I've got a list on my website. Check out her blog post. I've got that list on my website. We're going to bring her in. We're going to talk about the blockchain, help you understand what that is, talk about cryptocurrencies, and just briefly, let's just go to, heck, what does Wikipedia say about the blockchain? And being from San Francisco in the Bay Area, being born in Oakland, matter of fact, a lot of these issues are at the forefront in that area. And what's a predecessor for the blockchain? Something called the Merkle tree. And the Merkle tree is named after, let me grab this for you, Ralph Merkle, 1979. Oh, interesting, right? That was also the year that Ken mentioned. That was the year that caught his eye and his interest into investigating climate change. 1979, the Merkle trees. And it's based off of hash algorithm, I believe. Cryptographically speaking, the blockchain, incepted in 1992 by a guy named Bayer, Haber, and Stornetta. And it's based off of the ledger system, which is basically a peer-to-peer system of timestamping and ledgering blocks to prove the next link in the chain. Out of everything software, if you will, in cyberspace, it would be the blockchain that would be the most secure and hardest to hack, from my understanding. And, of course, one of the offshoots of the blockchain, so you based that platform on something called cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, which I think I first heard about in 2012. It's been around since 2009, I believe, and is really it's changing some things. So we're fortunate enough to have Preethi join us and give us her perspective of the blockchain and how that's changing her world, how that's changing her environment, and what it's like to be a blockchain engineer in Silicon Valley, if you will. It is 5:14, my watch. You've joined Winwood Radio. As I said, I broadcast weekly every Wednesday at this mark, at that 5:15 mark. Today I brought in Ken earlier, and again, every Wednesday I go at 5:15, bringing you some great guests for you to listen to and participate in discussion. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram, IanTrottier. Check out my website, please, iantrottier.com/radio. Just got Ian Trottier, it's fine. And I will be back with Preethi Kasireddy momentarily. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, thanks for tuning in again. This is your host, Ian Trottier. You're listening to winwoodradio.com, and today, as I mentioned to you, we've got an incredible guest that is currently working on the blockchain. She's here to help us understand that a little bit better and tell us what got her involved. Preethi, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Fantastic. So you're in, where are you? In Stanford, somewhere in California, right?
Yeah, I just moved to LA this week.
You're in LA, a little sunnier down there.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you spent some time at Goldman Sachs, and you did pretty well. I'm assuming then you made a transition into Andreesen Horowitz, and then you kind of you made this kind of 180, and you went into the blockchain. Can you tell us a little bit about why you did that and what attracted your attention to the blockchain?
Yeah, sure. So I actually worked at Andreesen Horowitz, and while I was there, we made the investment in Coinbase, which is a cryptocurrency wallet platform. And when we made that investment was when I first got introduced to the idea of a blockchain, and I started doing my own research on the side. Kind of fell in love with the concept, read all the white papers and stuff, and it was kind of just something that sat in the back of my mind. I was fascinated by the technology, but wasn't sure how I would apply it to my day-to-day and stuff. But when I left ACC&Z, I decided to become an engineer, and I can go into that in a different context. But basically, I went from VC to engineering, and one of my first roles as an engineer was being a software engineer at Coinbase. And so, I was on the investing side, and then I went and became on the operations side as well. So being an engineer there got me much deeper into the space. And then eventually I left and kind of started doing a lot of independent development in the blockchain space. And so that's how it got deeper into the space.
So for listeners out there to understand, the Coinbase is it a wallet or a trading platform for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, it allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin.
And what was it about Coinbase that attracted your group's attention there at Andreesen Horowitz?
I think I fell in love with the ideology of Bitcoin at the time. Completely decentralized, no central authority, no central person determining the rules of how this ledger is maintained. It gives the power back to the individual, and I really kind of fell in love with that concept. And so, why Coinbase at the time? I mean, honestly, there weren't many Bitcoin companies besides exchanges. Even now, there's not many. I mean, there's a lot of projects and protocols right now, but nothing really that's adopted at scale. Coinbase was one of the very few that actually had a lot of adoption, and I like the team, I like the founders, and so that's why I joined there.
Awesome. And Bitcoin in itself is just going bazonkers right now. I mean, the past few months, it's doubled almost, right?
Oh yeah, it's over 10,000 now.
That's incredible. Okay, so now can you help us understand exactly what is the blockchain in your in your words? What is it? And we've got some basics, so we know 2009 Satoshi Nakamoto, if I pronounced the name right, or the group of the name right, the name of the group right, kind of introduced this concept. What is it in your understanding? What is this thing that's called the blockchain? And how is it going to change our lives?
That's a very broad question. I think we're still figuring out how it's going to change our lives. We're nowhere close to figuring that out yet. But fundamentally, it's a technology that allows you to maintain state changes or transactions on this, what they call a distributed ledger. That's the nomenclature to use if you're kind of non-technical. But basically, think of it as a database that's managing all these different state changes, and it doesn't really require any central party to manage that database and to secure it and to make sure that no one's cheating that system and no one's trying to fake transactions in that database or create duplicate transactions in that database or whatnot. And then the other part is that like the database is architected such that the transactions are grouped into blocks, and that's why it's called blockchain. And so every X number of seconds or minutes, for Bitcoin is 10 minutes, for Ethereum it's 14 seconds, a new block gets created that contains transactions that have been confirmed or verified by not a central party, but people who are maintaining that database. So, like, that means me, you, whoever else is actually maintaining a copy of that database is the one that's responsible for securing and maintaining that ledger. And obviously, there's algorithms that determine how that happens, how they get secured and stuff. But that's kind of a high-level overview. And then how it will change the world. I think the fundamental premise is that, like, we have yet to think of all the ways. Like, right now, a lot of the obvious applications are being built, like wallets and exchanges, and, you know, people are using it in ways that sometimes don't even make sense. Like, it's kind of like the AI hype where, like, when some new technology comes out, everyone just tries to move the technology to that, like, you know, like AI for dogs or AI for cats. Like, you don't really need AI for dogs or cats. And so that's kind of what's happening right now. It's like blockchain for this, blockchain for that. But what I'm more excited about is, like, fundamentally creating new types of ways of doing stuff. It's a whole different mindset, and the mindset is that you're not relying on someone you don't have to trust anyone, and you're giving the power back to the individual to do whatever they want to still transact in a way in day-to-day life without having to rely on, like, a central party like Google or Facebook or Microsoft or whatever it is. Instead of handing their data over to them, they get to individually manage their own life in a way.
It's the whole kind of concept of a decentralized system, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's giving, what you're saying is it gives the power to the user. So in a cryptocurrency element, or like a Bitcoin or something like that, there's these mines. And then the mines are creating the blocks. Is that correct?
The mines?
Yeah.
You mean miners?
The miners, right?
Yeah. I mean, so the algorithm is the miners don't. Yeah, I guess you can think of it that way. So there's miners, and they're the ones that manage. They hold a copy of this database on their computers, and what they are responsible for doing is running these complex algorithms that prove that they've done something to show that the transactions that they're creating in this block are valid. And then once they run those computations to prove that, like, only one person, whoever does it the fastest wins, and that block gets added to this blockchain. And then the miners get rewarded for doing all this computation to secure the blockchain.
Okay, and are you actually so what does that mean? What are you doing right now? You're an engineer on this blockchain?
I develop for the blockchain, so I'm not a miner. I'm not a core Bitcoin developer either, or an Ethereum developer, but I write smart contracts for platforms like Ethereum. Okay,
awesome. Now, I've got a question for you, and listeners who have a little bit of knowledge about Bitcoin know that there's an alternative to Bitcoin, if I have that right, and that's called Ethereum. So my question to you is, what we know from the general public is that Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency was kind of introduced to society, mainstream, whatever it may be, by this Satoshi Nakamoto. And that identity is fairly secretive. So we don't know if it's an actual person or if it's a group. But we do know by name that it would seemingly be Japanese in origin, although we don't really know that either. So my question to you is, that identity is unknown. However, the closest competitor to Bitcoin in that space is this Ethereum. And we do know who's developed Ethereum, and that's a person named Vitalik. Pronounce his last name, Bishram, if I've got that right. So anyway, so we've got Vitalik as the identity behind Ethereum, yet there is no identity behind Bitcoin. How would you understand that? What does that mean?
It doesn't really mean. I mean, it means exactly what you said. So, Bitcoin was written. The Bitcoin paper was written by someone who was anonymous, and he fundamentally solved a breakthrough in the sense that he finally created an algorithm that didn't require he was one of the first pioneers of solving something called a double spend problem. And that is done by using this proof of work algorithm that the miners solve. So that was how the Bitcoin paper came out in 2008 or 2009, I forget. And the author of that paper was anonymous. But Ethereum, you can think of it as another blockchain, but they did do a lot of innovation to add a lot of improvements to Bitcoin. In the sense that they made it much easier to do things like write smart contracts. But the author of Ethereum didn't necessarily come out with a new proof of work algorithm or anything. It was more like they used a similar proof of work algorithm to Bitcoin. And the author, everyone knows the core author of Ethereum, but along with him, of course, there's a lot of other developers that are working on it. So he's not like the sole founder. In a sense.
Yeah, but certainly a genius in his own right, I'd imagine. Now, the next thing I wanted to ask you was Harvard Review has said this, and I don't know when the quote is. It might be a couple years old, but it says, and there's another thing I'll lead into, but to get your thoughts on this initially, the blockchain and this is a quote by Harvard Review, has the potential to create new foundations for our economic and our social systems. So we're already seeing the economic, perhaps some of the preliminary stages of how it will change the economic. Now, on a social system, your thoughts. But with that, let me then introduce to listeners the name Roger Ver. And what Roger Ver, in my understanding, is that he's one of the early investors. You can correct me if I'm wrong. The early investors of Bitcoin. And one of the current projects he's doing is a libertarian movement called Free Society. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't.
So Free Society is basically a concept to create a country's constitution and almost create a new country. And you basing that constitution off of the blockchain. But maybe we can back up in social systems, and maybe it's just not a space that you've looked into it at all. But is there a way that you're seeing outside of cryptocurrency that you're seeing blockchain develop, whether it be news or ride sharing? New ride-sharing apps based off the blockchain. Anything else out there besides cryptocurrency that you're seeing the blockchain be relevant?
Yeah, pretty much everywhere. So, like, a lot of the current applications are things like decentralized exchanges or decentralized prediction markets or decentralized I don't even know, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of different applications of how you can use the fundamental primitives of what a blockchain offers to improve existing systems. They're very early stages, but of course it's only a couple years into this, and I think you'll only really start to see the novel, interesting use cases probably 2, 3, 5, 10 years out from now.
Cool. And what are the what's the current project that you're working on right now in regards to the blockchain?
Yeah, I can't share much right now because I am working on my own thing, and pretty stealth mode right now. So I'll
Sure.
share more information when I'm ready. But yeah, previously I was a lead developer for something called Mercury Protocol, which I just finished up. And prior to that, I was doing a lot of independent development, of Ethereum smart contracts.
Awesome. And what about what in your eyes are some of the challenges right now that the whole industry is facing?
I think there's a lot of hype, so when I, for example, joined Coinbase in 2016, Bitcoin and Ethereum were like in a lull. Like no one even talked about Bitcoin. I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, Bitcoin's dead, and then all of a sudden 2017 came and it just completely blew up, and all of a sudden now even the average mom and pop type of person knows what Bitcoin and Ethereum is, or they're trying to understand, but there's a lot of hype in the space, and this is fine. This is what you need to kind of bring attention to new technologies to the mainstream, but I think one of the problems I see is the hype is in the wrong place, and so people are so obsessed with I think a lot of people don't even understand what the blockchain is, and they kind of understand ICOs and Bitcoin and Ethereum and making lots of money off of it. But one of the problems is that the actual technology layer itself still needs a lot of work, and there's so many problems to be solved at that layer today that we are still at an infancy stage, and I think we just need more attention, more funding, more developers that are focused on the actual technology, and less business people that are just hyping up the other stuff like the ICOs, which we don't really need more hype around. We need more hype around the problems that exist in actually the technology today.
So what are one of those problems?
I can rattle off a list, but scalability is a problem, privacy is a problem, something called formal verification of smart contracts is a problem. How do you govern these smart blockchains? That's not figured out. Yeah, the list kind of goes on.
Yeah. So, I mean, overall, it's like we can look at, and I talk about this on, I don't know if you've looked at some of my previous guests, but one of the conversations that I like to tackle is, for instance, the Federal Reserve, and we know that a cryptocurrency is certainly more it's more reliable than a paper currency. A paper currency just in itself is, many people refer to it as a fiat currency, right? There's very little value to it. And then we've got the whole concept to understand of national debt, right? So the U.S. debt we have about $17 trillion debt, and that's based off of elements supported by the Federal Reserve and dynamics that are making up that. But it's kind of centralized, if you will. It's like this kind of main central way of commerce. That yet this Bitcoin cryptocurrency element is something built in hyperspace, and it's built on a more secure platform and network. Do either of those elements that I'm talking about resonate with your understanding of the blockchain and Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies?
So can you elaborate? Can you elaborate on what do you mean by
Sure.
that?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So anyway, my understanding anyway is so the economic system of the U.S. is of the United States, for instance, is based off of a centralized banking platform. It's that in regards to what we have in the Federal Reserve, and I think that dates to 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, and then it's changed a little bit over time. So previous guests that I've had on have kind of stirred up conversation and perhaps argument that it gives too much power to a central group of people that are controlling large corporations. Let's take, for instance, let's take like Chevron or like Standard Oil, and Standard Oil broke up into companies like Chevron or Mobil and or Mobil, and so that's kind of a very centralized group that controls, we're assuming, a massive part of the Federal Reserve. So, in contrast to that, it's like, oh, here's this alternative form of currency that isn't dependent, if you will, on the powers that control the Federal Reserve. And I think this may you're familiar with Roger Ver. Is it Ver or Ver? Yeah. So I think this may be conceptually where he's coming from in developing this country. And my understanding is that he is negotiating with an actual a country that operates on a land mass, and then he would go in and basically lease, or his group would lease a portion of that land mass, and he'd create his own country based off of the blockchain. So my understanding of trying to interpret, why would this approach be done outside of, or even within the confines of an existing country? And I think it has to do with, at least my understanding anyway, is it has to do with this decentralized form of how we communicate with one another, or how we operate and conduct transactions one with another. So is any of that making sense to you?
Yeah. I mean, you're just saying that instead of having a central government manage the monetary fiscal policy, you're trying to create a free society that isn't governed by the government.
Yeah, or it has like more of a. I think the concept is it gives elements of the government more to the people, right? So the people involved in that system have a larger say. Which, I mean, getting off track, it kind of resonates to we the people, right? The U.S. Constitution, written in 1783, I think it was. We the people, and then there's voting rights, and there's all these different rights. So I think that was the angle that I was trying to understand anyway through the Free Society program that Roger's setting up. But yeah, so anyway, I think that to help listeners understand maybe more on a basic level, again, this cryptocurrency is taking away, it takes, at least in my understanding, it takes the power away from a centralized group, and it gives that kind of power of operating within it to those users more on a level basis. I don't know if does that make any sense to you?
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's, of course, there's some societies that have, either corrupt governments or a lot of power taken away from the individual, and so that goes back to the point I was saying, which is that the reason I'm obsessed with blockchains is because it gives power back to the individual by not requiring some central party to maintain trust amongst a group of people.
That's awesome, and that's so listeners understand your, if you will, academic training was industrial and systems engineering, which is different than what you're doing right now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, so I was an engineer, so I was a systems engineer, so a lot of blockchains is systems engineering, actually, and it's very applicable.
Okay, so it almost goes back, so almost your work in the financial sector was kind of different than your academic work, and then going back to the blockchain kind of gets more closer to your academic roots, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us a little bit about. I skimmed over some of the writings that you'd gone through on Medium, and Hack Reactor was something that that caught my eye. Can you explain what that is and your involvement in that?
So when I learned to code, or when I taught myself how to code, I did a lot of it on my own, and then I decided I wanted to join a boot camp called Hack Reactor, and it's just a 3-month program where you apply, you take an exam, and if you pass, you get in, and you're basically working 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, just coding and training yourself to be a software engineer along with 30 other people or so. And so yeah, I did that for 12 weeks and then continued on my development journey.
And do you prefer San Francisco or LA? Do you have a preference where to live?
I just moved to LA, so I definitely love LA. I love the weather here. I was in San Francisco, and of course I loved being in the Bay Area for 5 years. It was where I started my career. It was where I met, I have my entire network based in the Bay Area, but I wrote a blog post about why I'm leaving, which kind of went viral by accident. But I think it was time for a change. It was time for, as an engineer, I have the power to kind of be anywhere and still write code or build a company or whatever it is. I don't need physical presence is less and less important, especially with blockchain stuff, which is completely decentralized. And so I knew that I could kind of finally go to where I wanted to go. I didn't need to be physically in Silicon Valley anymore. And so I chose LA because much better weather, and it's close enough to Silicon Valley if I really need to go back. And then I think there's a really interesting tech scene that's popping up here, and I'm excited to kind of go out and explore it and really help kind of companies get started here. And yeah.
Awesome. And are you in Santa Monica or what part of LA?
I'm living in Marina del Rey, which is right by Venice Beach.
Cool. Yeah, I know the weather. The weather is great. I was in Palm Springs for about a year over the mountains there. And are you originally from Southern California? Where are you from originally?
No, I'm actually from New Jersey.
New Jersey. Interesting. Okay, my previous guest, we talked about climate change. I think he's originally from New Jersey or New York. Okay, fantastic. So the last thing I guess I wanted you to talk about a little bit more was, let's go back and we just have a few more minutes, but if you could expand on really what grabbed your attention with the blockchain and how you feel that you can contribute to that. And again, that kind of goes into what you just said about giving the user more power. I think you said something like that. It really has to coincide. It really coincides with the whole decentralization concept. Can you just briefly touch on that again?
Yeah, so again, right, the blockchain doesn't require a central party to manage it, and so instead it's managed by a group of miners and individual nodes. That's why it's called decentralized. It's not centralized. And the reason I'm obsessed with this idea is because instead of giving the power to someone central, like a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon or something, you're giving power back to the individuals to still securely transact in a network and still have trust in the network, but would not require a central party, which is the fundamental breakthrough of a blockchain. It's like you can still trust that everything in the blockchain is valid and secure, but you don't have someone central that you're trusting. Instead, you're trusting each other, or you're not trusting each other. You're trusting the code that it works and it secures the blockchain.
And it's out of like anything else out there, it's basically like the most secure coding system out there, right? It's like almost impossible to hack into. Is that right?
Yep.
Because it's like it's super sophisticated, and the ledger system having to prove the previous chains and that sort of thing. Preethi, thanks for taking your time to join Winwood Radio. Do you have a parting shot? And please inform listeners to Twitter, Instagram, any blog posts that they can follow you on.
Yeah, I write a lot on my Medium, so medium.com/@Preethi Kasireddy. And my Twitter handle is @IM_Preethi. And so, yeah, I think those are the best two places to follow me. And also, I just started a new site called hashhack.it, where I'll be focusing all my blockchain-related blog posts on there. So if you're only interested in reading my blockchain stuff, that's where I'll be posting all that stuff.
What is that again? Can you spell it out?
Yeah, HASH hack, HACK.IT, www.hashhack.it.
Hashhackit.com.
No, hashhack.it.
Oh, hashhack.it. Okay, cool. Is that like Italy? What is the IT?
Yeah.
It is.
But it sounds like, IT, like
internet technology.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Preethi, I think that's about time here. Do you have any parting words for listeners?
No, it's awesome. Have fun in sunny Miami. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Okay,
awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Pardon me, guys. Small independent radio station. We are Windward Radio, and I produce and I host. So there's a few little technical glitches that arise here and there. Ladies and gentlemen, Preethi Kasireddy, hashhack.it. Sounds like that's a really cool place to follow her. Follow her and get to know what she's doing on the blockchain. Again, small independent radio station. We've got a few technical glitches. Get to know what Preethi is doing. She's very wise. She's very savvy. And from everything I've been able to see, and again, I'm very fortunate that she spent her time and came on the program, she has a good feeling for understanding and reading the blockchain. And in my research, and again, I produce and I host this, so I bring to you guests that I feel you should and could and can and will be receiving good information from and good education on. And look, the bottom line is that we all individually contribute to make the world a better place. Excuse me. That is the bottom line, is that we help one another and we make the world a better place. Whether it be from Ken Caldera and understanding climate change and global warming, or Preethi Kasireddy and understanding the blockchain and how that can change things. So Roger Ver, and I've reached out to Roger. I think he's very busy. Not sure that he's received my request, but I'd like to invite him on the program because even as you heard, Preethi, being unfamiliar with what he's doing, he's creating and trying to create an entire country based off of the blockchain, and that is something called free society. The information is undisclosed because it's quite secretive. It is unknown what actual countries and land masses globally that group, free society, is currently speaking to. But we know that is one angle. And one way that this blockchain, and not to use that word too much, but it is for all intents and purposes, the cutting edge of the software industry, of the computer industry. It seems that things are moving that way. Creating a way of life, a government, a constitution that's based off of the blockchain is an incredible concept. And it is quite possibly something we could be looking at in the near future as a very real way of life. Developing on the blockchain is a totally different conversation, and one that, if you're interested in understanding it more, Preethi Kasireddy can help you understand. Again, she seems to be very savvy and very knowledgeable about a wide variety of subjects. And shifting into the financial sector from an industrial and systems engineering background, which she explained coincides with computer engineering, to the financial sector and having great success in the financial sector. Doing that, especially at Andreesen Horowitz, means that she's able to identify segments of the industry overall that have the most upside. And you heard her mention Coinbase. Coinbase being that investment that she and her group at Andreesen Horowitz, or the group overall, I think they were 16, I'm not sure what it is, age 16, invested in. And look, 3-4 months ago, the price of a Bitcoin was right about, my recollection, $3,000. Look, it's just, it means nothing other than the exposure that it's now getting, which Preethi alluded to. This year has been an incredible year for the Bitcoin. With that said, 2.5 weeks ago, I was talking about Bitcoin with a friend here locally in Miami, and with limited knowledge, not even knowing really what the price was, I'd mentioned to him at the time that it had just gone up over 7,000 USD. And when I looked, it was about 6,800 USD. Well, I don't know where it stands today, but this morning, Eastern Standard Time, it was well above 10,000 USD. That's the price for every Bitcoin. So I don't say this for you to, oh my goodness, look at a great way of spiking your portfolio. Why I say this is you can now see the attention that it's getting. And again, it's based off of a decentralized system of exchanging currency. Why does this become so much more important for us in 2017? It really has to do with the fact that the US dollar is very susceptible to many different factors. It could be strengthening, it could be weakening, but we do know, bottom line, is that there is a $17 trillion deficit in the federal government. And that is based off of a centralized system of banking. The Bitcoin, like Preethi mentioned, is completely and totally decentralized. And that's where this has incredible upside, not only in the economic sector, but as that quote that I read from you, for you from the Harvard Review, in many social systems. And we're seeing that come to light now in this free society concept by Roger Ver. So the Bitcoin. Arcade City, for example, and Preethi had mentioned there's a lot of them, but Arcade City is a new driving platform based out of Texas that is basically an alternative to your Uber, your Lyfts that are based off of the blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. Anyway, so that's throw that out there as something for you to look into. But more and more, it seems that yes, The blockchain, again, rooted from hash trees. I think they were Merkle trees, Ralph Merkle, 1979. This goes back a way. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you like to look into it in depth, follow that trail. Stuff goes back years and years and years. And there's many different people that contribute to the development of. But the blockchain is changing the way we receive goods, services, and what I'm believing is quite possibly our information and our news. Could be at the forefront, the next forefront. Thanks for tuning into Winwood Radio. And again, I want to mention iantrottier.com for my past guest today. We start at 3:30 with Ken Caldera. This show will be archived as Ken's is and will be uploaded to my website, iantrottier.com. I look forward to your feedback. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram, IANTROTTIER. And until next week, from Winwood, the Winwood District of Miami, on Winwood Radio, I am your host of Discussions, Ian Trottier. Talk to you next Wednesday. Until then, be awesome.